Some war movies were not buried because they were bad. They were buried because they were true. These 12 World War II films dared to challenge the myths nations built around themselves. They revealed atrocities, cover-ups, or inconvenient truths, and their own governments tried to kill them. But these films survived, and today they remain more powerful than ever. Here is the countdown. Number 12, Night and Fog, 1956. It opens with quiet ruins, broken fences, mounds of shoes, but then the screams come. Night and Fog is not a conventional war film. It is a French documentary about the Holocaust, and it horrified everyone who saw it, including the French government. Directed by Alain Resnais, only a decade after the camps were liberated, the film combined archival footage with haunting color shots of Auschwitz in peacetime. It showed crematoriums, bulldozers stacking corpses, and skeletal survivors. It was too soon, too graphic, and too honest. One particular scene triggered outrage. It showed a French policeman supervising deportations. The French government demanded that frame be removed. Cannes pulled the film under political pressure. Even after restoration, it was often screened in schools with heavy censorship. But Resnais refused to soften the message. The film asked a single, terrifying question: who is responsible when a whole system becomes murder? France wanted to bury its role, but this film exhumed it. Night and Fog became one of the most essential anti-fascist films of the century. Today it is mandatory viewing in some European schools. Back then it was the film no one wanted to claim, a mirror that showed too much. Number 11, Canal, 1957. The sewers of Warsaw echo with gunfire gas and hopeless whispers. Canal is the second film in Andrzej Wajda's legendary war trilogy, and it may be the most haunting. It tells the story of Polish resistance fighters fleeing through the underground tunnels after the failed Warsaw Uprising. The realism is suffocating, the tragedy is unforgettable. But the communist regime in Poland was not impressed. The film did not celebrate Soviet victory. It showed the betrayal of the Polish resistance. These were fighters the USSR labeled fascist sympathizers. Yet here, they were human, lost, and courageous. Wajda's film was accused of being unpatriotic by censors. Its release was delayed. International screenings were discouraged. Wajda filmed it in black and white with deep shadows and near claustrophobic tension. It was like a war horror film. There are no heroes, no glory, just doomed people choking in darkness. The symbolism was clear. The uprising was buried beneath Poland, and so was the truth. Despite attempts to suppress it, Canal slipped through the cracks. It won the special jury prize at Cannes, and Wajda cemented himself as a director unafraid to confront the past his nation wanted erased. Canal was banned in some countries and buried in others, but it always crawled back. Number 10. Fires on the Plain, 1959. By the time it was over, Japanese audiences walked out in silence. Fires on the Plain did not honor the Imperial Army, it dismantled it. Directed by Kon Ichikawa, this savage film follows a tubercular soldier wandering through the ruins of the Philippines, starving, hallucinating, and driven to cannibalism. That was the problem. Post-war Japan wanted to forget its darker chapters. Censorship boards and public broadcasters avoided the film for decades. It showed Japanese soldiers not as noble martyrs, but as brutal, starving men. There was no glory in the jungle, only madness and rot. Government-aligned critics called it unpatriotic. The military demanded scenes be removed before television broadcast. Even in film festivals abroad, it faced protests. Ichikawa's vision was deliberate. He wanted to strip away romanticism and nationalism. The film's protagonist is not a hero. He is a ghost dragging a body and a grenade. What made it more dangerous was that it was based on a real soldier's memoir. This was not fiction. This was testimony. Japanese war veterans were divided. Some called it a betrayal. Others whispered that it was the only war film that told the truth. Fires on the Plain was eventually embraced as a masterpiece, but only after decades of silence and shame. It is one of the few films that shows what the war did to the soul of a soldier, and what it revealed was too ugly to show at first. Number 9, The Bridge, 1959. Germany in the post-war years was in a delicate dance with its own guilt. That made the bridge an explosive disruption. This was not a film about Nazis. It was about schoolboys conscripted to defend a pointless bridge during the final days of the war. It was about innocents devoured by propaganda. Bernhard Vicky's film was raw. The boys die one by one in senseless bloodshed while adults flee and generals lie. It was the first major German film to confront the Hitler Youth legacy and ask, what happens when children are sent to die for a collapsing ideology? West Germany was not ready. The film was nearly censored. It was banned from some school screenings. Politicians accused it of undermining morale. The U.S. Army advised against distribution in American-occupied zones. But students embraced it, anti-war movements adopted it, and underground screenings kept the film alive. Decades later, German filmmakers like Volker Schlöndorff and Wolfgang Petersen credited the bridge as a turning point. It was the moment German cinema began to confront its national trauma, but when it first arrived, it was a scandal. The film survived not because it was wanted, but because it was too honest to erase. Number 8. Orders to Kill, 1958. It starts like a thriller. An American pilot is sent into occupied France to eliminate a suspected Nazi collaborator. But when he meets the target, a gentle, unarmed man, doubt creeps in. Orders to Kill is not a movie about victory. It is about the cost of obedience. This British-American co-production was one of the earliest to question the morality of Allied missions, and that made it dangerous. British censors hesitated. The U.S. Department of Defense refused cooperation. The protagonist is not a clean-cut hero. He is a haunted executioner. Director Anthony Asquith included long, quiet moments of hesitation, guilt, and post-traumatic breakdown. The ambiguity was too much. Theatrical release was limited. TV broadcasts were avoided. Veterans groups protested. British intelligence reportedly tried to prevent foreign distribution, citing damage to national image. And yet its message aged into relevance. The film raised issues about rules of engagement, decades before drone warfare made it a global debate. It was ahead of its time. That is why governments feared it, and why audiences today find it so brutally modern. Number 7. Trial on the Road, 1971. This film did not simply disappear. It was actively erased. Shot in the early 1970s by Alexei German Trial on the Road, told a story the Soviet Union could not tolerate. A former German soldier defects and joins a Soviet partisan unit. He wants redemption. What he receives is suspicion, cruelty, and endless tests of loyalty. The problem was not the plot, it was the humanity. Soviet cinema had strict rules. Germans were monsters. Soviets were heroes. German's film shattered that binary. The defector is fragile, haunted, and sincere. The partisans are paranoid, brutal, and morally compromised. That was unforgivable. Censors halted the film immediately after completion. It was locked in archives for 15 years. German was labeled a problematic director. His career stalled. Only during Glasnost in the late 1980s did the film finally see release. When it did, audiences were stunned. The realism felt modern. The silence between gunshots was louder than speeches. The film did not preach, it observed. Trial on the Road revealed a truth the Soviet state feared. War corrodes everyone. Loyalty does not erase guilt. Victory does not cleanse trauma. By refusing propaganda, German made one of the most honest war films ever produced, and the state tried to pretend it never existed. Number 6. The Battle of Neretva, 1969. On paper, it was untouchable. A massive Yugoslav epic backed by Tito himself, featuring international stars and a budget that dwarfed anything Eastern Europe had produced. But once the Battle of Neretva was released, the tone shifted. The film depicted partisan warfare with staggering brutality, internal conflicts, strategic sacrifices, civilian suffering. It was not a clean, heroic narrative. Western distributors cut it heavily. Eastern Bloc officials grew uneasy. Tito praised it publicly but privately limited discussion. As Cold War alliances shifted, the film became inconvenient. It showed Yugoslavia as independent and morally complex, rather than a simple communist success story. Prince vanished. International promotion stalled. Despite an Oscar nomination, it quietly faded. Today, it is recognized as one of the most ambitious anti-fascist war films ever made. At the time, it was too honest for both sides of the Iron Curtain, so it was buried beneath silence. Number 5. Hell River, 1974. When a war movie disappears from public record, it usually means someone wanted it gone. That is exactly what happened to Hell River. Released in 1974, this gritty partisan war film was a Yugoslav and American co-production starring Rod Taylor and Adam West. But after a brief release, it virtually vanished for decades. Hell River dared to depict Yugoslav partisan warfare with shocking nuance. It showed not only the brutality of the Axis forces, but also the moral fractures within the partisan ranks. The film exposed internal betrayals, civilian executions, and the psychological toll on guerrilla fighters. For a government that built its national identity on Tito's flawless resistance, this was blasphemy. Once the censors saw the final cut, state support evaporated. Government-aligned distributors blocked wide release. Promotional material disappeared. It was quietly shelved in archives without official explanation. Even American backers backed away. The film's raw violence and messy ethics clashed with Cold War narratives of clear-cut good versus evil. While a few VHS copies circulated abroad, the film became a ghost, forgotten by audiences, erased from state records, and ignored by historians. Only decades later did cinephiles and archivists begin to resurrect it. Restored prints revealed a film far ahead of its time. It was not propaganda. It was realism. It showed that in war there are no perfect heroes, just desperate people trying to survive. Number 4. Das Boot, 1981. At a time when most war movies celebrated glory, Das Boot dragged the audience underwater into pure, suffocating terror. Wolfgang Petersen's German epic followed a single U-boat crew as they fought depth charges, boredom, hunger, and hopelessness. But the film's power lay not in battles, it lay in the humanity of its enemy. This was the problem. The film made audiences care about German sailors, not Nazis, not monsters, just frightened young men trapped in a steel tube. When it premiered, the West was still uneasy with stories that humanized the other side. In Allied countries, governments hesitated. Broadcasters aired only shortened versions. Critics praised it, but networks feared it sent the wrong message. Even in Germany, some felt it went too far in reclaiming wartime identity. Petersen pushed for realism, sweat oil screams, and silence filled every frame. The men sang not for Hitler, but for each other. When the uncut version premiered years later, audiences were stunned by its emotional weight. Das Boot does not glorify the war, it suffocates with dread, and by showing that dread in the eyes of the enemy, it blurred the lines nations wanted to keep sharp. The original 3-hour cut was buried. Sanitized versions became standard. Only decades later did Petersen's full vision resurface and redefine what war cinema could be. Number 3. The Thin Red Line, 1964. Before Terrence Malick's poetic reimagining, there was a darker film adaptation of James Jones's novel, released in 1964 and directed by Andrew Martin. The Thin Red Line was grim, cynical, and too real for its time. But even this version was compromised. What was planned as a savage anti-war statement was softened by military pressure and studio fear. The novel depicted GIs in the Pacific losing their minds to fear violence and meaningless orders. Martin initially intended to honor that tone, but the U.S. military refused full cooperation unless scenes were removed. Studio executives feared backlash. They demanded changes. Soldiers who commit war crimes were rewritten. Commanders were made more sympathetic. Internal chaos was trimmed into clarity. Still, the film disturbed audiences. It avoided triumphalism. Its protagonist obeys orders but questions everything. The jungle is not a place of honor. It is a graveyard of illusions. Even with its edges blunted, the Thin Red Line left scars. Plans for a more faithful second adaptation circulated for years, but were blocked until Malick's version emerged decades later. That long silence was not creative. It was political. The story was too honest too early, and it revealed that even victors can lose their humanity. Number 2. Come and See, 1985. Come and See does not flinch. It screams. Directed by Elem Klimov, this Soviet film is widely regarded as one of the most harrowing depictions of war ever made. It follows a Belarusian boy who joins the partisans and experiences firsthand the Nazi destruction of villages and the systematic extermination of civilians. The horror is relentless, and that terrified Soviet censors. The film was almost banned. Klimov fought for years to get it made. When production began, officials demanded edits. They feared its trauma would be too much for Soviet audiences, that it would expose wounds the state preferred buried. But Klimov refused compromise. The final product is almost unbearable. Shot with surreal, long takes, blurred sound, and a child's perspective, the film does not offer comfort. There is no music cue for heroism, no glory, just ashes, screams, and a broken boy aging before our eyes. Come and See faced distribution delays. Screenings were limited. Foreign markets hesitated, yet it endured. It became a cult object for truth seekers and critics of sanitized war. It does not wave a flag, it sets it on fire, and by doing so, it rewrote the rules of war cinema forever. Number 1. Army of Shadows, 1969. France didn't reject Jean-Pierre Melville's Army of Shadows because it insulted the resistance it feared it for revealing the resistance's truth. Released in 1969, the film strips wartime heroism of myth, portraying resistance fighters not as noble icons, but as haunted, isolated figures drowning in paranoia, moral compromise, and quiet despair. There are no grand victories, only betrayal, execution of comrades, and death accepted as routine. Melville, a former resistance member himself, filmed memory, not legend. Yet France, still clinging to the fiction of near-universal defiance, recoiled. Critics called it nihilistic. Newspapers condemned it. State media blacklisted it. The film vanished within weeks. Its danger lay in its restraint. Nazis appear rarely. Their presence felt through suffocating dread. The real enemy is uncertainty, within cells, among friends. Survival demands cruelty, blurring the line between resistance and the violence it opposes. For decades, Army of Shadows was forgotten, dismissed as bleak and unpatriotic. Only in the 2000s was it resurrected as a masterpiece, one that honored the resistance, not by glorifying it, but by refusing to lie. In its honesty, comfort dies first. Truth dies first in war. But sometimes films dig it back up. These 12 movies were suppressed because they revealed what bullets and slogans tried to hide. They remain essential not despite censorship, but because of it. Watch them. Remember them. Because buried stories are often the most honest.